Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and pleased to have with me as my guest Michelle Mace Curran, who's a professional speaker, a Thunderbird pilot, a fighter pilot, author, and professional speaker. Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Michelle, I think you're the first fighter pilot that I've had on my program. So, let
Yes.
me start by asking you what made you want to do that? Was that a childhood dream? Tell me about that.
That's a good place to start because I think it's unexpected. When I was flying for the Thunderbirds, obviously you're inspiring a lot of kids in that role. And so I would
Yeah.
regularly get asked about when I had been doing air show as a child and decided. But honestly, I didn't have exposure to that growing up. I grew up in a small town in north central Wisconsin, about 4,000 people,
Wow.
not near a military base, not an aviation family, not a military family. And so honestly, I applied for an Air Force ROTC scholarship when I was in high school in order to pay for college. That
Huh.
was my initial motivation. But the plan was to be a criminal justice major because at that time I wanted to be an FBI agent
Huh.
long term. I was going to do 4 years in the military to pay back my time for my scholarship, get out, apply to the FBI Academy.
Uh-huh.
So I did graduate as a criminal justice major,
Uh-huh.
but halfway through that time, we visited a base down in Florida, Tyndall Air Force Base, and I saw two F-15s take off in full afterburner, one after another at dusk from the side of the ramp, and I was just awestruck by how
Huh.
awesome it was.
Huh.
And so I was either a sophomore or junior at that point in college, so a little bit later than a lot of people. And at that moment, I was like, I need to figure out how to go do that.
Now, many people see airplanes take off all the time, but very people will say that's something I want to do. Is there something specific about it? Was it, it seems dangerous, it seems difficult.
Yeah, I think all of the above. I was a really shy, introverted kid, but I was also super driven and adventurous. I loved thrill seeking. I was climbing things. I loved roller coasters. I love that physical sensation of going upside down and going fast. And that seemed like a way to do all of those things as a profession. And
Huh.
so I got goosebumps. I got just like that overall super excited feeling. And I don't think there's a lot of careers that can create such a visceral reaction. And so I was just all about it at that point.
Well, how do you go about doing this? I mean, you just
Yeah.
apply? I mean, how do you get accepted? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's much different to decide that your dream is to become a fighter pilot and then to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
So I was already in ROTC. So I was going to commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force the same day I graduated college. So I was already checking that box. You have to commission as an officer. Then you compete against other ROTC cadets, in my case, other people commissioning from the same location as you to get one of a handful of pilot slots. So I did that. That was based on GPA, physical fitness, cadet leadership. So I got one of those, went off to pilot training, which the formal portion is about a year long, but there's a bunch of other smaller trainings you have to do. So it ended up being about a 2 year time frame. I went into a class of 25 students with zero civilian flight time. So I'd never flown an airplane, never flown a Cessna or anything. So, and also I'm a criminal justice major. I am not
Yeah,
an
right.
engineer. It was a steep learning curve drinking from a fire hose. Like
Wow.
every concept from how the different systems in the aircraft work to aerodynamics to weather to everything was just new to me. I worked my butt off. I was so motivated, I think, by that goal
Huh.
that I just kind of worked relentlessly. And I had good study habits. I'd always been a good student, so that kind of paid off. And I got one of the two fighter aircraft that ended up being available for the class of 25. So it was
Wow.
pretty darn competitive.
That
And
is
then I went off to fly the F-16 from there.
that is amazing. Well, tell me about the physical aspect of flying a
Yeah.
F-16. I mean, it's gonna be tremendous.
Yeah. So people will often ask about the speed because the jet can fly twice the speed of sound.
Right.
And that sounds impressive, but in the cockpit, if you're flying straight, it doesn't really matter how fast you're going. You just, you feel one G, one times the force of gravity, much like you do sitting in this chair, as long as you're not accelerating.
Hmm.
And you don't usually have a frame of reference for how fast you are going because generally, with the Thunderbirds being an exception, you're flying at higher altitudes. So you don't have anything, whipping past to give you that feeling of speed.
Right.
What really demands a lot on your body, though, is when you're going fast and then you turn and you experience G forces. And so the F-16 can pull up to 9 Gs, nine times the force of gravity.
Yeah.
So whatever your weight is, you're multiplying that by 9 times at various points. And the G's push from your head towards your feet. So it's a lot of compression on the neck, on the spine. And then also to stay conscious, you have to do a lot of effort or have to put a lot of effort in that area because the blood gets forced out of your brain.
Yeah,
It can
right.
cause
Oh,
a G lock, a G induced loss of consciousness. So that is always something we're well aware of. It's always a threat, especially in the F-16, because it can turn very quickly. The G onset is very fast, and you can go from alert and flying the airplane to unconscious in a split second. Um, so it's hard on the body. Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah,
physical
right.
demands.
That's amazing. Well, anywhere along the process, did you think about quitting? Like, oh wow, this is just too much. I mean, it's very hard.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think it's at a point that most people wouldn't expect, though. It was very driven, and the course that you go through to become a pilot and pilot training is very structured. It's like you're going to complete this simulator, here's the grading sheet. You're going to complete this test, here's your score. So it's very clear what you need to do, what you need to focus on. And yes, it was a lot of work, but I felt like the same thing I had done through high school to have good grades to get a scholarship, the same thing I had done through college to graduate with a high GPA there, all of those tools still worked for me. I
Hmm.
put in a lot of work, I studied a ton, and I did really well.
Hmm.
And then eventually, as I moved up in these different programs, the standard and the difficulty obviously raises with you.
Yeah, right.
And I might be towards the top of my class in pilot training and get the F-16 I want, but now I go to F-16 training and everyone in that room was at the top of their class.
Right.
And so now I'm kind of like middle of the pack, which was still okay. But then I get to my first combat squadron, and that is where I definitely started to struggle. And
Hmm.
I think some of it was this feeling of working so hard and having all these wins and just like running towards this goal for years, getting there and discovering quickly that I had only learned the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
And there was just so much more to learn, so many skills to develop. And all of that just takes time. But there had never really been a point in my life where I wasn't able to just put in a lot of work and be good fairly quickly. And so I think my identity was really wrapped up in being good at things.
Yeah, right.
And then I get there and I'm probably just like average fighter pilot at that point, but I really struggled with just my identity and not being good for so long. And a few things happened where I really realized how dangerous the job that I was doing was
Yeah, right.
was, and so those risks kind of become forefront in your mind. And there's of course fear mixed in there, fear of failure, fear of judgment, finding your identity in this new community that you're going to be a part of for a decade plus. Gender is layered into that because only 2% of fighter pilots at that time were women,
Oh, yeah, I
so
can
you feel like
imagine.
you're under a microscope. And so there was definitely a point early on in that first assignment where if I was not in a contract with the Air Force, I would have considered just walking away, even though it was my dream for so long.
Interesting. So is being a fighter pilot anything like the movie Top Gun?
Yes and no. Uh, I loved especially Top Gun Maverick. I think it was really well done and entertaining, and like talk about just a extremely successful film. Like it's just the exposure it's gotten is insane.
Yeah.
The flying that they show in there, the demands on your body, like what it looks like to be flying that fast and that low, all of that is accurate. And
Okay.
so yes, they make it seem a lot more exciting than it is when you look at the like entire day in the life.
I can
You
imagine.
right, realistically, you might go fly for an hour or an hour and a half if you have one training flight that day. Around that though, there might be an entire day of mission planning, and then there's a briefing, and it's not sexy like it looks in the movie. It's not
Yeah.
like sitting in a room with everyone chewing on the end of their pen looking at these fancy graphics. It's like in a boring room with a computer, typing in coordinates, trying to get the thing to print in portrait when it keeps printing in freaking landscape. And like, like the stuff that anyone has experienced when they're kind of doing admin type tasks,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you do all that. There's no one else doing that. And then after you fly, for an hour and a half flight, especially if it's one where someone's going through some sort of upgrade to move up to the next level of expertise and they're being graded, you could debrief for 4 hours or 6 hours.
I see.
And that is not exciting.
Yeah.
It's painful sometimes. People like, you're just in this room looking at tapes, recording from the cockpit,
Mm.
analyzing decisions that were made, figuring out what we could do differently, what we need to learn from. And that's honestly what makes fighter pilots really good is that debrief kind of focus.
Mm.
But it can be painful when you're doing it because it can be very long and very much in the weeds.
Did you have any close calls, harrowing calls?
Several, yes. I think the couple that jump out actually weren't in a combat setting. I didn't have anything crazy happen when I was in Afghanistan, but in 2019, my first year with the Thunderbirds, we flew an air show down in Colombia, and it was our practice show on Friday. I was only about 2,000 feet off the ground, which is high by Thunderbird standards, but low by general aviation standards. And I was going almost 500 miles an hour, and I
Wow.
hit a vulture. So obviously, vultures are huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we think it was this specific type of vulture based on I had a GoPro running, so we caught a video of it.
Yeah.
That usually has like a 5 to 6 foot wingspan, and it's just a flash. Like there's no time for me to react. I feel it, I hear it, I know what happened, but then you have the few seconds after that where you're waiting to see what the repercussions of that are going to be,
Yeah.
and you definitely get temporal distortion where time slows down as you like sniff to see if you smell smoke and you look at your engine instruments and you see if the engine's winding back. You know, F-16 only has one. So
Yeah.
you're in a serious world of hurt if you lose your engine. We do have an ejection seat, so that's a backup, but no one wants to eject. That's a traumatic event. And long story short, the tip of the wing caught the intake that goes into the engine, like sits right underneath the pilot,
Yeah.
and sent some feathers into the engine. They actually had to replace that the next day. But luckily the weight of the bird, the body, cartwheeled along the outside of the aircraft, and it put two fist-sized holes straight through the exterior metal. Like not
Wow.
even like a dent, but like it punched it out like a cookie cutter.
Wow.
And those pieces of metal were floating inside the two different skins on the aircraft. And I've just never, I think we've all hit smaller birds, like it just happens in aviation,
Yeah.
but I'd never hit anything of that size and I'd never seen a jet damaged in that way.
Wow.
But
Wow.
I landed successfully from it. The aircraft handled fine. The engine was okay, at least for that period. But it's definitely, when you say close call, that's the first thing because if that bird had been a foot and a half the other direction, that entire force would have gone straight into the engine. And based on the damage I saw on the outside, I have no doubt it would have just destroyed the inside of that engine. I would have been very quickly in a very expensive glider.
Wow.
And I don't know what would have happened from that.
Whoa. Yeah, that is pretty scary. Now tell me about you actually flew actual live combat missions?
Yes, yeah, in Afghanistan.
Wow. What was that like?
I actually really enjoyed being deployed
Huh.
because, you train for so long. So there's a lot of purpose in actually going and doing the mission.
Yeah.
And the mission of close air support, which is what we were doing, which is, supporting Americans and allies on the ground, is so rewarding to
Hmm.
know that you have the equipment and the skill to change the tide of a fight for some, 19-year-old army infantryman
Yeah.
like who's in a bad situation
Right.
is just such a cool mission to be part of.
Huh.
Um, but it's stressful
Yeah, I
because
can
like
imagine.
you realize the repercussions in that environment. And I think it's one thing to feel the stress of yourself being in danger, like flying low altitude, high speed with the Thunderbirds. The margin of error is very small there. And obviously, you can find yourself in a dangerous situation very quickly. But when you're dropping weapons close to friendly forces, it's a whole nother level of stress. Like, I think
Mhm.
every fighter pilot's worst nightmare is not themselves actually being hurt, it's employing a weapon in the wrong way, making a mistake where it costs other people's lives.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
you feel that pressure all the time, but it's also just incredibly rewarding. And it's such an amazing team environment.
Hmm.
You don't, single seat aircraft. I'm the only one in the jet,
Right.
but I'm flying with a wingman. We're working together to execute attacks. We're talking to someone on the ground who's controlling the fight. There's people, watching from a drone. Like there's all of these pieces working together in such an amazing coordinated way. And it's just really cool to be a part of that.
Hmm. Interesting. What did your parents think when you told them you wanted to be an F-16 fighter pilot?
I don't think they were surprised. I feel like
Oh, really?
I was always, like
Huh.
I want to go skydiving. Let's go bungee jumping. Let's do this. Um, I think they were proud, right? Like I know
Yeah.
they were constantly telling people about their daughter who was flying F-16s.
Yeah, right.
As I got into the Thunderbirds and they got to really experience firsthand what I was doing,
Yeah.
I think that was impressive to them, but also scary.
I can imagine. Yeah, right.
Because I mean, I was solo pilot, so we do a lot of the maneuvers that are meant to cause shock and awe for the audience. Head-on passes where it looks like 500 miles an hour each aircraft, we're going to hit each other, and the audience generally like will gasp as it happens.
Yeah, right.
So for my parents to be watching that, knowing their daughter is in one of those aircraft, I think was very stressful for them. And my mom actually told me when I stopped flying 2 years ago that she was glad that it was over. Like
Yeah.
they're super proud, but she was glad that I wasn't, risking my life every day anymore.
Is the Thunderbirds actually more dangerous statistically than flying live combat missions or not?
Yes, based on the number of pilots, there's just only 6 of us each year, so the
Yeah.
statistics are hard to compare to each other.
Oh, right.
But that's 100% the most dangerous flying I've ever done in my career,
Yeah, yeah, I can
by
imagine.
far.
It's Thunderbirds. It's like Blue Angels. I'm familiar with Blue
Yep,
Angels. It's
yep.
basically something. Yeah, yeah, interesting, huh? What is the average career span of an F-16 fighter pilot? I'm guessing it's not super long, given the stresses and everything to your body.
Yeah, so you incur a 10-year commitment
Wow.
when you go through pilot training because they invest so much money and time in training you.
Yeah, right.
So that was about 2 years after I graduated college and commissioned into the Air Force. And then I have this 10-year commitment. So about the 12 to 13 year point of being on active duty is the first time you even have the option to consider leaving.
Huh.
And a decent amount of people decide to pivot at that point,
Yeah,
for various reasons. The lifestyle is tough with family, you're gone a lot.
for
The
sure.
demands and the wear and tear on your body is a real thing, something I for sure struggled with. Back pain, neck pain are really common. And then a lot of people, the airline industry is appealing because the schedule is pretty good, the pay is really good, and you can develop a long-term career, starting in your mid 30s if you leave at that point. I would say most people that decide to stay in after that point will stay till 20
Hmm.
and get a retirement.
Right,
And so I
right.
think there's two kind of big exit points. It's right after like that initial commitment's up 12 to 13 years in, or it's at that 20-year mark.
And what did you decide?
I left at 13
Uh-huh.
and it was 13 instead of 12 because the Thunderbirds asked us to stay for a third year because the pandemic just threw a wrench in
Oh, right.
everything for the team from hiring to proficiency of the pilots that were new that season. They just didn't get a lot of repetition. So I ended up going a year past my commitment. A lot of things had happened though. I was in constant back pain, like every
Hmm.
single day, and I still struggle with it. I'm doing a lot of things to try to fix it now, but
Oh, wow.
I was just like, I don't want to do this for 7 more years. This wear and tear is just beating me up. I met my husband when I moved here to Vegas. So we've been married for 5 years at this point, but I had a stepson then, and like my priorities just shifted as they were very established here in Las Vegas, and I couldn't really see how that would work to pick this family unit up and move every 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's a shift as well. And then the third thing is that flying for the Thunderbirds, a huge part of your mission is this inspiration part of it beyond just flying the jets. And especially being the only woman flying for the team during that period, I was just constantly having these amazing interactions with people
Hmm.
where, especially little girls, where I would just see their eyes light up and like their idea of what was possible for them in the world just got bigger.
Hmm.
And that was so rewarding.
Hmm.
It was just so much more rewarding than the cool flying was.
Huh.
And after 3 years of doing that, I wanted to continue doing that. And I
Hmm.
didn't think that staying on active duty, I would be able to do that necessarily how I wanted to. Flying for the airlines, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I took, I would say, a path way less traveled and took a leap
Yeah,
of
man.
faith, became an entrepreneur, wrote a couple kids' books, started being a full-time keynote speaker,
Huh.
and I've just built my business from there over the last 2 years, and I have no regrets. It's been amazing.
Yeah, I bet. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what do you speak on, and who
Yeah.
do you speak to, and what is the topic? Tell me and what is the theme of your messages?
So when I got asked to speak by my first paid client, and it was a private boys' school. And they're like, "We're going to put you in front of the entire high school. So it's going to be 400 boys." And I was like, "Okay, like this is kind of an unexpected audience. What would I say to them that could really impact them? I could get up there and talk about cool flying, show jet videos, and they would
Yeah,
be happy. They would
yeah,
be
yeah,
entertained.
yeah.
But what in my experience of my career do I feel like other people could learn from the most?" And so I sat down and I wrote a speech, and it's actually the same speech I give now. It's heavily edited, it's gotten much better. I am much better at performing it, 80 plus repetitions and on stage at this point.
Right.
But the core message has stayed the same. And that is kind of to take this, I get put on a pedestal as a Thunderbird pilot, right? It's almost like this superhero-esque
Yes.
type thing where a lot of people don't even associate it with something they could actually go do.
Yeah.
And so to get on stage and speak vulnerably and authentically and not just talk about cool jets, but to talk about fear of failure and self-doubt and imposter syndrome and those moments where I did struggle, where I wanted to quit and I didn't think I was good enough and I was never going to be decent at this job, and just share that so openly,
Hmm.
and then bring them through the evolution of how I overcame that, how you have to force yourself to start things and take action and do it when it feels uncomfortable. Believe that you're going to figure it out as you go and be bold and take those risks. And then kind of having this pinnacle of flying for the Thunderbirds and then standing on a stage and confidently speaking. When I talk about being shy and introverted and all those things as well, mixed in that story, it normalizes that for people.
Hmm.
And it makes them realize even if they feel all those things and experience all those things, it doesn't have to limit what they go do.
Yeah, right.
And so it acts as a catalyst. And I have had people come up to me afterwards crying. I have had people say that
Um,
that was exactly what they needed to hear. And a lot of them go and do really incredible things because of the speech. And they'll
hmm.
reach out on LinkedIn or they'll reach out on Instagram and they'll share with me, like, "Hey, I saw you speak 4 months ago. You made me decide to go back to school and get a doctorate. You
Wow.
made me decide to change jobs and go after this big dream or start a nonprofit or write a book."
Hmm.
And to just be that little force that can push people to go after what they're actually capable of on their own
Hmm.
is so cool.
Yeah,
I
that
love
really.
doing it.
So who do you speak to now? You speak to all kinds of audiences?
All kinds, honestly, a lot of financial services, that's pretty common. Banks,
Huh.
credit unions, law firms is fairly common.
Huh.
Um, some stuff in the automotive space, business aviation, because they're already love aviation, but they're far enough away from being a fighter pilot that it's kind of this like perfect fit. Uh, I mean, I was lucky enough in my first year to speak at Microsoft, John Deere, Boeing,
Huh.
several universities. Like the reception has just been amazing. And to give, like I said, about 80 keynotes in the last 2 years, I
Yeah.
just hit the ground running. It's continuing to grow. The audiences are continuing to get bigger. And the reception has just been, the feedback has been incredible.
Yeah, interesting. And your message, I guess, is universal enough. It doesn't
It
matter
is.
that you're not a software engineer or that you're
Yep.
not a financial service analyst or whatever you're like. It doesn't matter that you didn't do the things that you're speaking to the audience. Because obviously, I mean, no, I mean, very few people are fighter pilots. So you're never going to be talking to somebody who did exactly what you did.
Right. And that's why I wanted to tell the story the way I do
Hmm.
and not just talk about, I didn't want people just to be like, "Well, that was impressive. She's cool. Like she flew jets." Like, wow.
Right,
I
right.
wanted them to be like, "Wow, she's just like me."
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Because I think the most powerful thing you can do as a speaker is to connect to your audience.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
when people feel that, they're compelled.
So now that you've done whatever 80 some odd of these,
Yeah.
does it get boring? Does it get old? Are you tired of giving the same speech?
No, I've gotten so much better and it's so much fun to figure out how you can make it better, how you can shift your comedic timing a little bit to get a bigger laugh from the audience,
Right.
how you can play off of the people that randomly will yell things in response to a rhetorical question, and just interact with them
Uh,
and tweak little lines and realize like when I started doing this, I did not realize how much of a craft being
Yeah.
a good storyteller or public speaker actually is,
Yeah.
and that you can say the same words but delivered with different emphasis on different words or in a different tone or different body language can mean something completely different to the audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm having fun.
Now, have you also written a book about your life story? Or I see you mentioned a couple of children's books, but have
Yeah.
you also written a book about your life story or these messages?
So I am currently in edits with one of the big
Oh,
publishers, and hopefully we'll be announcing in the next few months, but I do have a personal development book that's in the works. I cannot wait to give people more solid details on that, like the title and
yeah.
the timeline for release and the cover art.
Okay.
Traditional publishing is a long road. It's like a 2+ year process, and we're in the
Yeah.
thick of it right now. But yes, it's written, it's being edited,
Oh, that's very cool.
and talk about telling stories from the cockpit and being vulnerable and life lessons and all the things. It's one thing to talk for 45 minutes or to share it in a social media blurb. It's another thing to write 70,000 words about it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I'm excited for everyone to read it and to share, but I gotta be patient. It takes a while.
Well, particularly since I'm guessing when you were going through all that, it's not like you were taking notes thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book, right?
No, absolutely not. And it's been actually enjoyable and cathartic to try to dig back into all those parts of the last 15 years
Yeah.
and try to figure out how I felt then versus how I view it now. And I don't think that everyone, has a desire to write a book, but digging into those parts of your life where you went through hard things and you overcame them and figuring out how you did that and what you learned from it and how you felt in that moment. I've learned a lot just from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, how do you reflect on it now? I mean, it sounds like you found this really amazing career that seems to suit you very well. It's completely different from
Yeah.
what you were doing before. I mean, do you find it ironic? Do you find yourself just kind of wondering how this happened?
Yes, absolutely. So when you know, like I said, I'm shy and introverted kind of by nature. The
Yeah.
shyness I've overcome, but I think the introverted, like I recharge by having time to myself, not by interacting with a big group of people. So I
Yeah.
have to manage my energy fairly carefully when I'm on the road speaking.
Yeah.
But if I could go to the 2019 Thunderbird team, especially the pilots, when I was just struggling through trying to show up as what I imagine the perfect Thunderbird should be, when I had so many people demanding time and energy, like you're a public figure.
Yeah, right.
And so you have to be on all the time. Like every interaction you have with someone, I compare it to being a character at Disney World,
Right.
right? Where like if Cinderella is having a bad day and is tired, she can't show that.
Right.
She has to make that child's like 5 minute interaction with her perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's hard for me just personality wise, right? I find it fairly energy draining. And so I would complain about it a little bit because I just didn't know how to manage it yet. That got better later on in that assignment. But if I was to go ask them, like, hey, do you think that Michelle or Mace would ever go be a public figure, a keynote speaker, be in doing these interactions by choice full time?
Yeah.
They would have thought that was insane.
Uh-huh.
And so I think it's unexpected, but I just love it so much and I find it so fulfilling and I feel like it's what I'm supposed to be doing. But I think that's such a good example of how much we can learn and grow and evolve as people.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was only 5 years ago, so this isn't like a lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
But with some practice and some like focus on a goal, you can do these things that feel uncomfortable and hard with some repetition.
Yeah. That's totally cool. Well, do you see yourself doing this 10, 15, 20 years down the line? Maybe it's a little hard for you to vision it that further down, or do you see yourself evolving to something else, or what do you think?
I think it'll evolve over time. I think the general mission of trying to help other people and inspire them and empower them and using storytelling as a way to do it, I think that will stay the same.
Yeah,
But I think how I do that will probably change,
sure.
as it shifts to other projects and other opportunities. And one of my favorite things about what I'm doing now is getting in, like opening my inbox and having some brand new unexpected opportunity in there waiting for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, yeah,
Whether that's a keynote speech or it's some sort of brand partnership or it's some just amazing experience that someone's asking me to go do, or like there's just so many opportunities coming up, and to have complete control of what I say yes and no to,
yeah.
I'm just along for the ride at this point, excited to be here and just see what happens. Like I get asked a lot, like, what do you see this in 10 years. And I can't tell you exactly what that looks like, but I'm enjoying it so much right now. I think that's okay.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm super honored that you agreed to do this podcast, given the kind of requests and demand you're at. It was a super interesting conversation. And when you do write the book, I hope you'll come back and tell me about it.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to share that with everyone. And thank you for having me.
This is Richard Hsu and Michelle Curran. Thanks.